Here's where I am currently on the Mughal polystyrene drawing project. I worked on it a little, primarily during the early night hours. I recall using these Sharpie markers to work on coloring in the 0 of the 50 of this 50 crate on the back of the Mughal polystyrene drawing project. I recall using this Sharpie marker a little too. I determined getting to this point by looking at closely a couple reference images I took many months ago using the snipping tool to make a couple screenshots on my laptop. I'm currently in the process of editing the May 11 my dinner video. In Camtasia 2019. After I had 2 full cups of plain coffee, and a partial 3rd cup that was essentially just a splash of coffee. I had this coffee from an early night pot I made around 7:15 p.m. intending for it to be a surprise for my dad. And so he could have some coffee when he got back from Romig's Tavern, which is where he got this burger with American cheese, meat, hot sauce, and bacon for me. Along with an order of onion rings. Which he's sharing with me. I also made that evening pot early night pot of coffee so I could practice making a pot of coffee using our coffee maker myself, since historically my dad has always made the pots of coffee. We have a coffee maker that'll accept both traditional ground coffee but also accepts Keurig pods, though we always use ground coffee. I think because that's cheaper in the long run. It was pretty easy for me to make a pot of coffee that way. I just needed to remember the settings that my dad uses to make a pot of coffee. And more importantly, to ensure I only used one coffee filter. I also recall having 2 full cups of plain coffee and a partial third cup that was, again, essentially just a splash of coffee. From 3 p.m., around 3 p.m., to around 5:15 p.m. Those cups of coffee were from the morning pot my dad made. Only for those cups of coffee, I used a cup different from this one, which is the one I used for the early night cups of coffee. Around 3 p.m. I had with my first cup of coffee from the morning pot my dad made. half of the last classic square donut that my dad got the other day from the Salty Bread Pizza Cafe. And with that half of that donut, I had 2 Santa Cruz cookies, which is the name Pepperidge Farm gives to their oatmeal raisin cookies. Then around 5:15 p.m. I had that third partial cup of coffee that was just a splash of coffee from the same morning pot. With that, I had some leftovers of what I had for dinner yesterday. I recall finishing the editing for the May 10 My Dinner video in Camtasia 2019. During the evening hours, and then uploading it to my YouTube channel during the early night hours. I recall naturally waking up today around 2:15 p.m. after falling asleep around 6:45 in the morning. I also had a glass of whole milk with everything else I had around 5:15 p.m. I recall at that time I used this same glass that I just used. In between those 2 times, I had some tap water out of that same glass. Around 11 p.m., I decided to go back on this game for the first time in at least a week. And it turns out a new update was recently done, which added this raid to the game, along with a rat skin and a bug skin. Since while for the first raid, all of the enemies are humans, for this raid, all of the enemies are bugs. This new raid is meant to be more difficult than the first raid, though This raid is still very easy for me since the enemies at this level, I'm able to take them all out with just one of my standard attacks. And these enemies can't do any damage to me because of all the armor I have. These enemies also can't do any damage to me. And I can always take them out in one hit, too. It takes me encountering the higher level enemies that you first encounter during the third stage of the raid. For me to not be able to take them out, guaranteed, in one hit with my standard attack. And for them to be able to do any damage to me. And even that doesn't seem to be guaranteed, but I recall seeing the last time I did that raid, this enemy doing 2 points of damage against me. That doesn't seem to be that enemy's lucky day at all. But yeah, for this higher level enemy for this raid, I'm not guaranteed to take that enemy out in one standard attack. Where I'm at currently, the worst I ever recall receiving from that raid I just did was 2 points of damage. And that was from one of the higher level enemies for that raid. I recall planning all of this wheat during the late afternoon, early evening hours. Here's where I am currently in terms of clearing out the ancient city. And I recall getting these chickens during the evening hours. I grew these chickens up from hens. Since I realized earlier, either today or yesterday, that I'm going to need more eggs to complete this main task set for Oceania.